The dust swirled around Sarah Beth's worn leather boots as she stood frozen beside the weathered wagon, watching her father count the handful of grain kernels that would determine her fate. The autumn wind of 1872 carried the scent of dying grass across the endless Colorado plains, and with it, the bitter taste of desperation that had become as familiar as her own breathing. Thomas McKenna, her father, had aged 20 years in the past too. His once broad shoulders now curved inward, like a man carrying the weight of impossible choices. His calloused hands trembled slightly as he poured the grain from one palm to the other, calculating whether it would last through the approaching winter. Sarah Beth knew the answer before he spoke. It wouldn't. The drought had been merciless. 3 consecutive seasons without adequate rainfall had turned their modest farm into a wasteland of cracked earth and withered crops. The cornstalks stood like skeletal fingers, reaching toward a sky that offered nothing but endless blue mockery. Their few remaining chickens had stopped laying weeks ago, and the last of their cattle had been sold just to buy the grain her father now held. Samuel Hartley sat atop his black stallion, observing the family's plight with the calculating gaze of a man who had learned to profit from others' misfortune. His silver mustache twitched slightly as he watched Thomas struggle with the decision that would change everything. Hartley owned the largest ranch in 3 counties, and his wealth had grown substantially during these hard times as desperate families sold their land for fractions of its worth. Sarah Beth's mother, Margaret, stood in the doorway of their small cabin, her thin frame silhouetted against the dim interior. Her once golden hair had faded to the color of wheat, left too long in the sun, and her blue eyes held the hollow look of a woman who had watched her dreams crumble like the parched earth beneath her feet. She clutched her youngest child, little Emma, to her chest, while 8-year-old Joshua clung to her worn calico skirt. The conversation between the 2 men had been going on for nearly an hour, though Sarah Beth had only caught fragments of it. Words like debt, foreclosure, and arrangement drifted on the wind, each one landing like a physical blow. She understood enough to know that their farm was lost, their family broken, and their future uncertain. Thomas cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion when he finally spoke. "Mr. Hartley, you're asking me to trade my daughter for provisions that might last us through winter. That's asking me to trade away the most precious thing I have." Hartley shifted in his saddle, leather creaking beneath his substantial frame. His grey eyes remained fixed on Sarah Beth as he replied, "I'm offering your family a chance to survive, McKenna. Without this arrangement, you'll all starve before spring. At least this way the girl will be fed, clothed and housed properly. She'll work in my household, nothing more. It's an honest position." Sarah Beth felt her stomach clench at the way Hartley's gaze lingered on her. At 19, she had inherited her mother's delicate features and golden hair, though months of hard labor and poor nutrition had left her thinner than she should be. Her dress, once a cheerful yellow, had faded to the color of old parchment, and the fabric showed careful mends where it had torn during endless hours of farm work. The wind picked up, sending tumbleweeds skittering across the yard and rattling the loose boards of their barn. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain that would come too late to save their crops, but might make the approaching winter even more brutal. Margaret's voice carried from the cabin doorway, barely above a whisper but audible in the stillness. "Thomas, we have to think of the little ones. If Sarah Beth goes, there'll be more food for Emma and Joshua, and maybe she'll find a better life." The words hit Sarah Beth like a physical blow. Her own mother was willing to send her away, to sacrifice her for the survival of the others. She understood the logic, had even considered suggesting it herself, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that terrified her. Thomas removed his hat and ran his fingers through his graying hair. The gesture revealed the deep lines that worry and hardship had carved into his forehead. "She's not livestock, Margaret. She's our daughter. And she's also a grown woman who can make her own choices," Hartley interjected smoothly. "Miss McKenna, what do you say? Are you willing to come work for me in exchange for provisions for your family?" All eyes turned to Sarah Beth, The weight of their stares felt heavier than the bags of grain she'd hauled during harvest time. She looked at her father's defeated expression, her mother's desperate hope, and the frightened faces of her younger siblings. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. But before she could speak, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew everyone's attention to the dirt road that led to their property. A lone rider emerged from the heat shimmer, his horse moving at a steady pace that suggested a long journey. As he drew closer, Sarah Beth could make out a tall figure in a worn brown coat, his hat pulled low against the sun. The stranger reined in his horse at the edge of their property, taking in the scene with intelligent dark eyes. His horse, a sturdy bay mare, bore the dust of many miles, and saddlebags suggested he was traveling through rather than staying. The man himself appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and the lean build of someone accustomed to hard work. "Afternoon," the stranger called out, touching the brim of his hat. "I'm looking for the town of Cedar Falls. Am I headed in the right direction?" Thomas nodded, grateful for the interruption. "About 15 miles northeast. You'll want to follow the main road until you reach Miller's Creek, then turn north." The stranger's gaze moved to Hartley, then to the family, and Sarah Beth saw something flicker in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding of what he'd interrupted. "Much obliged," he said simply, but he made no move to continue on his way. Hartley's jaw tightened with obvious irritation. "We're conducting business here, stranger. Best you move along." The man's dark eyes fixed on Hartley with a steady regard that seemed to take the measure of him. "Free country, last I checked. Public road, too." His voice carried a quiet authority that suggested he wasn't easily intimidated. Sarah Beth found herself studying the newcomer more closely. There was something about his presence that seemed to shift the balance of power in their small gathering. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man comfortable with himself and his place in the world, and his calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to Hartley's growing agitation. "What's your name, stranger?" Thomas asked, perhaps sensing an ally in their desperate situation. "Nathan Cross," the man replied. "I own a ranch about a day's ride south of here, the Circle C." Hartley's expression changed at the mention of the ranch name. "Cross, I've heard of you. You're the one who's been taking in strays and troublemakers." Nathan's mouth curved in what might have been a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I prefer to think of it as giving folks a second chance. Sometimes that's all they need." The tension in the air grew thicker as the two men regarded each other. Sarah Beth sensed that there was history between them, or at least knowledge of each other's reputations. She wondered what kind of man Nathan Cross was, and why his presence seemed to unsettle someone as powerful as Samuel Hartley. "Mr. Cross," Margaret called from the doorway, her voice carrying a desperate hope. "Are you perhaps in need of workers at your ranch?" Nathan turned his attention to her, and Sarah Beth saw something soften in his expression. "Depends on the kind of workers, ma'am." "What kind of work are you looking for?" Before Margaret could answer, Hartley spurred his horse forward, positioning himself between Nathan and the family. "The girl's already spoken for, Cross. We've got an arrangement." "That's so." Nathan's gaze moved to Sarah Beth, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks under his scrutiny. "Doesn't look like any papers have been signed, and the young lady hasn't said a word about what she wants." Thomas straightened his shoulders, finding some of his old backbone in the presence of this unexpected supporter. "You're right about that. Sarah Beth, what do you have to say?" The moment stretched out like the endless prairie around them. Sarah Beth felt the weight of her family's future pressing down on her, but for the first time in months, she also felt like she might have a choice. She looked at Nathan Cross, trying to read something in his weathered features that would tell her what kind of man he was. "I need to know what's being offered," she said finally, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "Both of you." Hartley's face darkened. "I've already made my offer clear. Room, board, and honest work in exchange for provisions for your family. It's more than generous." Nathan dismounted from his horse with easy grace, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He was taller than Sarah Beth had expected, and his presence seemed to fill the space around him. "What kind of honest work?" he asked Hartley directly. Household duties, cleaning, cooking, mending, what any woman would do in a proper home. And she'd be free to leave whenever she chose? Hartley's hesitation was brief, but telling. The arrangement would need to last long enough to be worthwhile for both parties. Can't have people coming and going as they please. Nathan nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. He turned to Thomas. What exactly do you owe, Mr. McKenna? Thomas glanced nervously at Hartley before answering. $300 in back taxes, plus another $100 in debts for seed and supplies. The drought took everything we had. $400, Nathan repeated thoughtfully. He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch that clinked softly with the sound of coins. That's a manageable sum. Hartley's eyes widened. Now wait just a minute, Cross. You can't just ride in here and disrupt legitimate business. What business is that, Hartley? The business of taking advantage of desperate families. Nathan's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the quiet words. Sarah Beth watched the exchange with growing amazement. This stranger was willing to pay her family's debts, but what did he want in return? Men didn't part with that kind of money without expecting something valuable in exchange. What would you want from me? She asked Nathan directly, her chin lifted with a defiance she didn't entirely feel. Nathan met her gaze steadily. Honest work for honest pay. I need help running my ranch house, and I need someone who isn't afraid of hard work. You'd have your own room, regular meals, and wages of $20 a month. You'd be free to leave whenever you chose, and you'd be free to visit your family whenever you wanted. The offer was so much better than Hartley's that Sarah Beth felt suspicious. Why would you do that for strangers? Because I've been where your family is now, Nathan replied simply, and because someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. Sometimes you have to pass that kindness along. Hartley's face had grown red with anger. This is ridiculous. You can't just buy people, Cross. I'm not buying anyone, Nathan said calmly. I'm offering employment to someone who needs work, and I'm helping a family in need. Last I checked, that was called being a decent human being. The wind shifted, bringing with it the first drops of the promised rain. Sarah Beth felt them on her face like tears from heaven. Too late to save their crops, but perhaps not too late to save her family. She looked at her parents, seeing hope bloom in their eyes for the first time in months. There's one condition, Nathan added, his gaze still fixed on Sarah Beth. I need to know that you're making this choice freely, not because you feel forced into it. I won't have anyone working for me who doesn't want to be there. Sarah Beth felt tears prick at her eyes. When was the last time anyone had asked what she wanted? When had anyone cared whether she had a choice? She looked at her family, seeing the love and desperation in their faces, then back at this stranger who was offering her something she'd never expected. Respect. I'd like to accept your offer, Mr. Cross, she said quietly, but I need to know more about your ranch and about you. I won't go anywhere with a man I don't know anything about. Nathan nodded approvingly. Smart woman. Here's what I can tell you. I own the Circle C Ranch about 30 miles south of here. I run cattle and horses, and I employ 6 men who've all been with me for at least 2 years. Mrs. Rodriguez, who's been my housekeeper for 5 years, recently moved to California to care for her sick daughter. That's why I need help. You can ask anyone in Cedar Falls about my reputation if you want references. Thomas stepped forward, his voice gruff with emotion. Mr. Cross, I can't let you pay our debts without some guarantee that Sarah Beth will work for you. It wouldn't be right. The only guarantee I need is her word that she'll give the job a fair try, Nathan replied. If it doesn't work out, we'll figure something else out. I'm not in the business of holding people against their will. Hartley's horse pranced restlessly, sensing his rider's agitation. This is absurd. McKenna, you're making a mistake. This man could be anyone, could want anything from your daughter. At least you know who I am. That's exactly the problem, Nathan said quietly. Everyone knows who you are, Hartley. The rain began to fall more steadily, creating small puffs of dust where the drops hit the dry earth. Sarah Beth felt the cool moisture on her skin and thought it felt like freedom. She looked at Nathan Cross, this stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to voice. "I'll need to pack my things and say goodbye properly," she said. "When would you want me to start?" "Take your time," Nathan replied. "I was planning to stay in Cedar Falls tonight anyway. I can come back in the morning if that suits you." Thomas extended his hand to Nathan, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mr. Cross, I don't know how to thank you. You've given my family hope when we had none left." Nathan shook the offered hand firmly. "Just raise those children right and teach them to help others when they can. That's thanks enough." Hartley wheeled his horse around, his face dark with fury. "You'll regret this, McKenna, and you, Cross. We'll see how long your generosity lasts when you realize what you've gotten yourself into." He spurred his horse into a gallop, disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust and righteous indignation. Sarah Beth watched him go with a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had the feeling this wasn't the last they'd see of Samuel Hartley. As the rain continued to fall, the family gathered on the small porch of their cabin. Nathan accepted Margaret's invitation to wait out the worst of the storm, and Sarah Beth found herself studying him as he sat in her father's chair, talking quietly with her parents about practical matters like travel arrangements and her responsibilities at the ranch. Little Emma had overcome her shyness enough to approach the stranger, and Sarah Beth watched with surprise as Nathan's stern features softened when he spoke to the child. He pulled a small wooden horse from his pocket, carved with obvious skill and care, and presented it to Emma with the solemnity of a knight bestowing a royal gift. "My daddy made that for me when I was about your age," he told the little girl, "but I think it would be happier here with you." Emma clutched the toy to her chest, her eyes wide with wonder. It was the first new thing she'd had in months, and Sarah Beth felt her throat tighten with emotion at the stranger's kindness. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah Beth found herself relaxing in Nathan's presence. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and direct. He asked about her experience with ranch work, her ability to read and write, and her feelings about leaving her family. His questions were practical but kind, and she sensed that he was genuinely trying to assess whether the arrangement would work for both of them. "I should warn you," she said during a lull in the conversation, "I've never worked as a housekeeper before. I know how to cook and clean and mend, but I've only done it for my own family." Nathan's dark eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Mrs. Rodriguez always said that experience could be learned, but character couldn't be taught. From what I've seen today, you've got plenty of character." The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving the air fresh and clean. Nathan rose to leave, promising to return the following morning to escort Sarah Beth to her new home. As he prepared to mount his horse, Thomas pulled him aside for a private word. "Mr. Cross," Thomas said quietly, "I need to know your intentions toward my daughter. She's a good girl, and she deserves to be treated with respect." Nathan met the older man's gaze directly. "Mr. McKenna, I give you my word that your daughter will be treated with nothing but respect while she's in my employ. She'll have her own quarters, she'll be paid fairly, and she'll be free to leave whenever she chooses. That's a promise." Thomas nodded, satisfied with what he saw in Nathan's eyes. "Then I'll trust you with the most precious thing I have." Indeed, as Nathan rode away into the gathering dusk, Sarah Beth stood on the porch watching until he disappeared from sight. Tomorrow, her life would change completely. She would leave everything she'd ever known to work for a man she'd met only hours ago, in a place she'd never seen. The uncertainty was terrifying, but for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. Nathan Cross had given her a choice, and with it, a glimmer of hope that her future might hold something better than mere survival. Inside the cabin, her family began to plan for a future that now seemed possible. The grain that Hartley had offered would have lasted perhaps 2 months. The money that Nathan had promised would see them through the winter and into the spring planting season. More than that, it would allow them to keep their land and their dignity. As Sarah Beth helped her mother prepare their meager dinner, she found herself wondering about the man who had changed their lives so dramatically. What kind of ranch did he run? What had happened to make him so willing to help strangers, and what secrets lay behind those dark eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing? The questions would have to wait for tomorrow. But as she lay in her narrow bed that night, listening to the gentle patter of rain on the roof, Sarah Beth allowed herself to hope that perhaps her story wasn't ending, but beginning. The morning would bring new challenges, new uncertainties, and a journey into the unknown. But it would also bring the chance for something she had almost forgotten how to dream of. A life of her own choosing, built on her own merits, with a future that stretched as wide and endless as the Colorado sky. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah Beth's last thought was of Nathan Cross and the kindness of strangers who sometimes appeared just when they were needed most. She had no way of knowing that this was only the beginning of a story that would test her courage, challenge her beliefs, and ultimately transform not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. The rain continued through the night, washing the dust from the world and preparing the earth for whatever seeds the future might bring. And somewhere in the darkness, Sarah Beth McKenna took her first steps toward a destiny she could never have imagined, carried forward by hope and the promise of a man whose own story was yet to be told. Chapter 2. The Circle C Ranch. The morning sun painted the Colorado landscape in shades of gold and amber as Sarah Beth McKenna finished securing her few belongings to the back of Nathan Cross's wagon. Her entire life fit into 2 worn carpet bags and a small wooden trunk that had belonged to her grandmother. The meager collection seemed almost pitiful against the vastness of the prairie that stretched endlessly in every direction. Nathan had arrived at dawn, as promised, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 well-fed horses. The sight of the healthy animals had been Sarah Beth's first real indication that Nathan Cross was indeed a man of means. In these hard times, only someone with substantial resources could afford to keep horses in such good condition. The goodbye with her family had been more difficult than Sarah Beth had anticipated. Little Emma had clung to her sister's skirts, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face, while Joshua had tried to be brave by helping load her belongings. Her mother had pressed a small bundle of lavender from their dying garden into Sarah Beth's hands, whispering that it would remind her of home. Her father had said little, but the fierce hug he'd given her spoke volumes about his love and his guilt at having to let her go. Now, as the wagon wheels began to turn and carry her away from everything she'd ever known, Sarah Beth felt a mixture of excitement and terror that made her stomach clench. She sat beside Nathan on the wooden bench seat, acutely aware of his presence and the way he handled the reins with practiced ease. His hands, she noticed, were scarred and calloused from years of hard work, but they were also steady and sure. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled south. The flat farmland gave way to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and pine. Rocky outcroppings jutted up from the earth like ancient monuments, and Sarah Beth found herself marveling at the wild beauty of this untamed country. She had rarely traveled more than a few miles from home, and the sheer scope of the world beyond her family's farm was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Nathan proved to be a thoughtful traveling companion, pointing out landmarks and explaining the geography of the region. He showed her Eagle's Peak, a massive granite formation that served as a navigation point for travelers, and Miller's Valley, where wild horses were said to run free. His voice carried genuine affection for this harsh but beautiful land, and Sarah Beth began to understand why he had chosen to make his life here. They stopped at midday beside a clear stream that wound its way through a grove of cottonwood trees. Nathan watered the horses while Sarah Beth unpacked the lunch her mother had prepared. The simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried apples seemed almost festive, eaten in the dappled shade beside the babbling water. "Tell me about your ranch," Sarah Beth said as they sat on a fallen log, sharing the modest feast. "How long have you owned it?" Nathan's expression grew thoughtful as he gazed out across the water. "I bought the land about 7 years ago, right after I got out of the army. It was mostly wilderness then, just a few hundred acres with a rundown cabin and not much else. I've been building it up piece by piece ever since." "You were a soldier?" Sarah Beth asked, surprised by this revelation. Nathan nodded, but she sensed that the subject was painful for him. "I served in the cavalry for 8 years, saw action in Kansas and Oklahoma Territory, mostly dealing with disputes between settlers and local tribes. It was difficult work." The way he said it made Sarah Beth suspect there were stories behind those words that he wasn't ready to share. She had heard tales of the Indian Wars from other veterans who had passed through their area, and none of them had been pleasant. She decided not to press for details. "What made you choose ranching?" she asked instead. Nathan's mouth curved in a slight smile. "I always loved working with horses, even as a boy. My father was a blacksmith back in Missouri, and I grew up around them. When I got out of the army, I wanted to do something peaceful, something that built things up instead of tearing them down. Raising cattle and horses seemed like a good way to do that." They resumed their journey in the early afternoon, the wagon rolling steadily through increasingly rugged terrain. The road, such as it was, became little more than twin ruts carved by countless wagon wheels over the years. Sarah Beth found herself gripping the edge of the seat as they navigated steep descents and rocky passages that seemed barely wide enough for their wagon. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a hill that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. Sarah Beth gasped at the sight that greeted her. Spread out in the basin before them was the Circle C Ranch, and it was far more impressive than she had imagined. The ranch house itself was a substantial 2-story structure built of honey-colored logs, with a wide front porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the building. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, and flower boxes beneath the windows added splashes of color against the golden wood. Several outbuildings dotted the landscape around the main house: a large barn, a bunkhouse, various sheds and corrals, and what appeared to be a blacksmith shop. But it was the animals that truly captured Sarah Beth's attention. Hundreds of cattle grazed in the valley's lush grass, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. In the corrals near the barn, she could see horses of every color and size, from sturdy work animals to sleek riding horses that seemed to dance with barely contained energy. "It's beautiful," she breathed, forgetting for a moment to be cautious around this man she barely knew. Nathan's expression softened with obvious pride. "It's taken a lot of work to get it to this point, but yes, I think it's beautiful too. There's something about this valley that just feels like home." As they descended into the valley, Sarah Beth could see ranch hands working among the cattle and horses. They paused in their tasks to wave at Nathan, their faces showing the easy familiarity of men who respected their boss. A few of them stared curiously at Sarah Beth, clearly wondering who this young woman might be and what she was doing on the ranch. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the main house, and Nathan jumped down to help Sarah Beth descend. His hands were strong and warm as they steadied her, and she felt an unexpected flutter of nervousness as she found herself standing so close to him. Up close, she could see flecks of gold in his dark brown eyes and small lines around them that spoke of long hours squinting into the sun. The front door of the house opened, and a small, elderly Mexican woman emerged onto the porch. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her dark eyes sparkled with curiosity as she took in the scene before her. She wore a simple brown dress, covered by a spotless white apron, and her weathered hands suggested a lifetime of hard work. "Senor Nathan," she called out in accented but clear English, "you have brought us a visitor." Nathan smiled and guided Sarah Beth toward the porch. "Elena, I'd like you to meet Miss Sarah Beth McKenna. Sarah Beth, this is Elena Morales. She's been helping me run this place since Mrs. Rodriguez left." Elena's face broke into a warm smile as she descended the porch steps. "Ah, so you are the young lady Senor Nathan told us about. Welcome to the Circle C, mija. We are happy to have you here." Sarah Beth felt some of her nervousness ease at the woman's genuine warmth. "Thank you, Mrs. Morales. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work here. Please, call me Elena. We are not so formal here." Elena's sharp eyes took in Sarah Beth's worn dress and tired expression. "You must be exhausted from your journey. Come, let me show you to your room so you can rest and freshen up before dinner." As they climbed the front steps, Sarah Beth marveled at the quality of the house's construction. The logs were perfectly fitted, the porch boards solid beneath her feet, and the windows gleamed with recent cleaning. This was clearly the home of a man who took pride in his surroundings and had the means to maintain them properly. The interior of the house was even more impressive. The main room featured a massive stone fireplace surrounded by comfortable-looking furniture, and the walls were lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. Warm rugs covered the polished wooden floors, and oil paintings of Western landscapes decorated the walls. It was a far cry from the sparse functionality of her family's cabin. Elena led her up a staircase made of the same golden logs as the exterior walls. The second-floor hallway was lined with several doors, and Elena opened one near the end of the corridor. "This will be your room," Elena announced, stepping aside to let Sarah Beth enter. Sarah Beth's breath caught in her throat as she took in the space that would be her new home. The room was larger than the main room of her family's entire cabin, with a big window that looked out over the valley. A comfortable-looking bed dominated one wall, covered with a beautiful quilt in shades of blue and white. A sturdy dresser, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, and a small writing desk completed the furnishings. Fresh wildflowers in a pottery vase on the windowsill added a welcoming touch. "It's lovely," Sarah Beth said softly, running her hand over the smooth surface of the writing desk. "I've never had a room to myself before." Eleanor's eyes crinkled with understanding. "I thought you might appreciate some privacy. The house has 6 bedrooms, so there is plenty of space. Senor Nathan uses the master bedroom at the other end of the hall, and the rest are for guests or storage." Sarah Beth nodded, filing away this information about the layout of the house. It was reassuring to know that she would have privacy and that Nathan's room was far from her own. "Now," Elena continued, "let me explain your duties, so you know what is expected. You will help me with the cooking, cleaning, and laundry. We prepare 3 meals a day for Senor Nathan and sometimes for the ranch hands when they are working close to the house. The house has 8 rooms that need regular cleaning, plus the kitchen and washroom. It is much work, but not too much for 2 women working together." Sarah Beth nodded eagerly. "I'm used to hard work, Elena. My family had a farm, and I did all the cooking and cleaning there as well." "Good. But here you will have help, and you will be paid well for your work. Senor Nathan is a fair man, very different from some of the other ranchers in this area." Elena's tone suggested there were stories behind that statement, but she didn't elaborate. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Nathan's voice called out, "Elena, is everything all right? I brought up Miss McKenna's bags." Elena opened the door to reveal Nathan standing in the hallway with Sarah Beth's modest luggage. He had removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that was slightly mussed from the journey. His eyes sought out Sarah Beth's face, as if checking to make sure she was comfortable with the arrangements. "The room is perfect," Sarah Beth assured him. "Thank you for your thoughtfulness." Nathan set her bags down near the dresser, his movements careful and respectful. "Elena will show you around the rest of the house and explain the daily routine. If you need anything, just let her know. We eat dinner at 6 o'clock, which gives you about 2 hours to rest and settle in." After Nathan left, Elena helped Sarah Beth unpack her few belongings. The older woman made no comment about the worn condition of Sarah Beth's dresses or the meager nature of her possessions, but her kindness was evident in the gentle way she helped arrange everything in the spacious dresser. "There is hot water in the kitchen," Elena said as they finished. "I will bring some up so you can wash before dinner, and tomorrow we will talk about getting you some new dresses. A woman needs proper clothes for working in a house like this." "Oui." Sarah Beth's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I'm afraid I don't have money for new dresses. These will have to do." Eleanor's expression softened. "Mija, you are working for Senor Nathan now. He provides what his employees need to do their jobs properly. Do not worry about the cost. Left alone in her new room, Sarah Beth sank down on the edge of the bed and tried to process the dramatic changes in her circumstances. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been facing the prospect of becoming little more than an indentured servant to Samuel Hartley. Now, she found herself in a beautiful home, treated with respect and kindness, with the promise of fair wages and proper working conditions. It seemed too good to be true, and that worried her. In her experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. What did Nathan Cross really want from her? Why was he being so generous to a family of strangers? And what secrets might this beautiful ranch be hiding? A soft knock interrupted her troubled thoughts. Elena's voice called through the door, "I have hot water for you, Mija." The warm water felt like luxury against Sarah Beth's travel-dusty skin. As she washed and changed into her least worn dress, she tried to calm her nerves about the dinner that would mark her first real test as an employee of the Circle C Ranch. When she made her way downstairs at 6 o'clock, she found Nathan waiting in the main room, freshly shaved and wearing a clean white shirt. He had changed from his travel clothes into dark trousers and a vest that emphasized his lean build. His dark hair was neatly combed, and Sarah Beth noticed that he was actually quite handsome when he wasn't dusty from the road. "You look rested," he said with a smile that transformed his serious features. "I hope the room meets with your approval." "It's more than I ever expected," Sarah Beth replied honestly. "Thank you for your generosity." Elena appeared in the doorway that led to the kitchen. "Dinner is ready. Shall we eat in the dining room tonight, Senor Nathan?" "I think that would be appropriate for Miss McKenna's first evening," Nathan agreed. The dining room was another revelation for Sarah Beth. A long wooden table dominated the space, surrounded by 6 matching chairs with leather seats. A chandelier made of wrought iron hung overhead, its candles casting a warm glow over the polished wood surfaces. The walls were decorated with more paintings, these depicting ranch life and western landscapes. Elena had prepared a feast by Sarah Beth's standards: roasted beef with gravy, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The abundance of food was almost overwhelming after months of sparse meals at home. "This is delicious, Eleanor," Sarah Beth said, after tasting the perfectly seasoned beef. "I hope you'll teach me to cook like this." Eleanor beamed with pleasure. "Of course, Mija. Cooking is one of life's great joys when you have good ingredients to work with." Nathan proved to be an engaging dinner companion, asking thoughtful questions about Sarah Beth's background and sharing stories about the ranch and the surrounding area. He spoke of the challenges of raising cattle in this harsh climate, the satisfaction of working with horses, and his hopes for expanding the operation in the coming years. "What about you?" he asked as Elena served the apple pie. "What are your hopes for the future?" Sarah Beth paused with her fork halfway to her mouth, surprised by the question. No one had ever asked her about her hopes before. Her life had been entirely focused on immediate survival and helping her family get through each difficult day. "I've never really thought about it," she admitted. "I suppose I always assumed I would marry eventually and have children of my own. But lately, just surviving has been enough of a challenge." Nathan's expression grew serious. "Well, now that survival is no longer a question, perhaps you'll have time to think about what you really want from life. There's no reason a woman can't have dreams and ambitions of her own." The statement was so progressive that Sarah Beth wasn't sure how to respond. Most men she knew believed that a woman's only purpose was to marry and have children. The idea that she might have choices and dreams beyond that was both thrilling and terrifying. After dinner, Nathan excused himself to check on the ranch hands and make his evening round. Elena and Sarah Beth worked together to clear the table and wash the dishes, and Sarah Beth was pleased to find that they worked well as a team. Elena was patient with her questions and generous with her knowledge, clearly eager to share the responsibility of running such a large household. "Tell me about the ranch hands," Sarah Beth asked as they finished cleaning the kitchen. "Nathan mentioned that he employs 6 men." Elena nodded. Good men, all of them. There is Jake Morrison, the foreman. He has been with Senor Nathan since the beginning. Then there are Tom and Billy Sullivan, brothers from Ireland who know everything about cattle. Miguel Hernandez is our best horse trainer, and young Danny Walsh is learning the trade. Finally, there is Sam Peters, who helps with everything and can fix anything that breaks. They all live in the bunkhouse. See, except for Miguel, who has a small cabin near the horse corrals. He's married and his wife is expecting their first child. Elena's expression grew fond. Maria is a sweet girl, very young and far from her family in New Mexico. I try to look after her when I can. Sarah Beth filed away this information, building a mental picture of the community she had joined. It sounded like Nathan ran his ranch more like a family than a business, caring for his employees and their personal needs as well as their work performance. As the evening wound down, Elena showed Sarah Beth through the rest of the house, explaining the daily cleaning routine and pointing out the supplies she would need. The tour revealed even more evidence of Nathan's prosperity: a well-stocked pantry, a modern pump for the kitchen sink, and even a small library off the main room filled with books on everything from animal husbandry to poetry. Senor Nathan loves to read, Elena explained when she noticed Sarah Beth's interest in the books. He says, education is the key to success in life. You are welcome to borrow any of these books whenever you like. The offer delighted Sarah Beth, who had always loved reading but had little access to books beyond the few her family owned. The prospect of having an entire library at her disposal was almost as exciting as the promise of fair wages. When Elena finally bid her good night and retired to her own room on the first floor, Sarah Beth made her way upstairs to her new bedroom. She stood at the window for a long time, looking out over the moonlit valley and trying to process the incredible changes in her life. The ranch was beautiful and peaceful. Nathan seemed to be an honorable man, and Eleanor was already becoming a friend. But Sarah Beth had learned to be cautious about accepting good fortune at face value. Life had taught her that every blessing came with a price, and she wondered what the price would be for this apparent salvation. As she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about Nathan Cross and the mysteries that surrounded him. He was clearly a man of means and education, but he had chosen to build his life in this remote valley far from civilization. His military service had left scars that went deeper than the surface, and his willingness to help strangers suggested a man trying to atone for something in his past. The bed was more comfortable than anything Sarah Beth had ever slept in, with a soft mattress and clean, sweet-smelling sheets. But despite her exhaustion from the long day of travel, sleep was slow to come. Her mind was too full of questions and possibilities, fears and hopes that seemed to chase each other in endless circles. Somewhere in the darkness beyond her window, a coyote howled its lonesome song to the stars. The sound should have been frightening, but instead Sarah Beth found it oddly comforting. It was the voice of the wild country that was now her home, calling to something equally wild and free in her own heart. She had taken the first step toward a new life, but she sensed that this was only the beginning of a journey that would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Nathan Cross had offered her hope and opportunity, but what would he expect in return? And what would happen when Samuel Hartley inevitably tried to make good on his threat to cause trouble? As exhaustion finally claimed her, Sarah Beth's last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude for the chance to start over, coupled with a plea for the wisdom to navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new experiences, new relationships, and new tests of her courage and character. The Circle C Ranch slept peacefully beneath the star-filled Colorado sky, holding its secrets close, while its newest resident dreamed of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The future stretched ahead like the endless prairie, full of promise and peril in equal measure. But for tonight, Sarah Beth McKenna was safe, warm, and fed. And for a young woman who had faced starvation and slavery only days before, that was miracle enough to build dreams upon. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. Sarah Beth woke before dawn to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle being moved to fresh pasture. For a moment she lay in the comfortable bed, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, and she sat up with a mixture of excitement and nervousness about her first full day at the Circle C Ranch. The pale light filtering through her window revealed frost on the glass, reminding her that winter was approaching rapidly. She dressed quickly in her warmest dress, a faded blue wool that had seen better days, but was still serviceable. As she braided her long blonde hair, she could hear movement in the kitchen below and the sound of Elena's voice humming a gentle Mexican lullaby. When Sarah Beth made her way downstairs, she found Elena already busy preparing breakfast. The kitchen was warm and inviting, filled with the delicious aromas of coffee brewing, bacon frying, and bread baking in the oven. Elena looked up from stirring a pot of oatmeal and smiled warmly. "Buenos dias, mija. Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," Sarah Beth replied, though in truth she had awakened several times during the night, her mind too active to allow for deep rest. "What can I do to help?" Elena handed her an apron and pointed toward a basket of eggs on the counter. "You can scramble those for the ranch hands. They will be in soon for breakfast, and they eat like hungry wolves." As if summoned by her words, the kitchen door opened and a tall, weathered man with graying hair stepped inside, removing his hat as he entered. His clothes were dusty from the morning's work, but his manner was respectful as he nodded to both women. "Morning, Elena, ma'am," he said, directing the second greeting to Sarah Beth with curious but kind eyes. "Sarah Beth, this is Jake Morrison, our foreman," Eleanor said. "Jake, this is Miss McKenna, who will be helping me run the house." Jake extended a calloused hand to Sarah Beth, his grip firm but gentle. "Pleased to meet you, Miss McKenna. Welcome to the Circle C. I hope you'll be happy here." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I'm sure I will be." More men began filing into the kitchen, each removing his hat and offering polite greetings. Sarah Beth was introduced to Tom and Billy Sullivan, red-haired Irishmen with identical grins and easy laughter. Miguel Hernandez, a serious young man with kind eyes who spoke softly of his pregnant wife. Danny Walsh, barely 18 and still growing into his lanky frame, and Sam Peters, a grizzled veteran of many ranches who seemed to take everything in stride. The men settled around a large wooden table in the kitchen, and Sarah Beth helped Elena serve them generous portions of eggs, bacon, oatmeal, and fresh bread with butter and jam. She was struck by the easy camaraderie among the workers and their obvious respect for both Elena and, by extension, herself. "Where's the boss this morning?" Tom Sullivan asked around a mouthful of bacon. "He rode out early to check the north pasture," Jake replied. "Said something about wanting to move the breeding stock to winter grazing before the weather turns." "Smart man," Billy agreed. "That north wind has been getting sharper each night. Winter's coming early this year, mark my words." As the men ate, Sarah Beth listened to their conversation about ranch business, weather patterns, and local news. She learned that cattle prices were falling due to oversupply in eastern markets, that wolves had been spotted near the southern boundary of the ranch, and that the railroad was considering extending a line through the valley, which could significantly impact the local economy. After the ranch hands finished their breakfast and headed out to their daily tasks, Elena began teaching Sarah Beth the morning routine. They washed the breakfast dishes, tidied the kitchen, and began preparing ingredients for the midday meal. Elena was a patient teacher, explaining not just what to do, but why certain methods worked better than others. "Senor Nathan likes his coffee strong, but not bitter," Elena explained as she showed Sarah Beth how to prepare the special blend he preferred. "And he always takes his eggs over easy, never scrambled. He is not a demanding man, but he has his preferences." As they worked, Elena shared more details about life on the ranch. She had come to work for Nathan 3 years earlier after her husband died in a mining accident. Her own children were grown and living in California, and she had been grateful for the steady employment and safe living situation that Nathan provided. He is a good man, but a lonely one, Elena said quietly as they kneaded bread dough together. He works too hard and smiles too little. Perhaps having another young person around will be good for him. Around mid-morning they heard hoofbeats in the yard, and Elena glanced out the window. Ah, he returns, and he has brought a guest, it seems. Sarah Beth looked out to see Nathan dismounting from his horse near the front porch. With him was another man, older and more elaborately dressed, who seemed oddly out of place in the rustic ranch setting. The stranger wore a dark suit with a gold pocket watch chain visible across his vest, and his horse was a flashy Palomino that looked more suited to parades than ranch work. "That is Mr. Weatherby from the bank in Cedar Falls," Elena said, her tone suggesting she was not particularly fond of the visitor. "He comes here sometimes to discuss business with Signor Nathan. Usually it means trouble of some kind." Nathan and his guest entered through the front door, their voices carrying into the kitchen as they settled in the main room. Sarah Beth couldn't make out the words, but the tone of the conversation seemed serious, even tense. "Should I take them coffee?" Sarah Beth asked. Elena nodded. "Yes, but be quick about it. Men like Weatherby do not like to be interrupted when they are conducting business." Sarah Beth prepared a tray with coffee and some of Elena's excellent sugar cookies, then made her way to the main room. Nathan and his guest were seated near the fireplace, a stack of papers spread out on the low table between them. Both men looked up as she entered. "Ah, Miss McKenna," Nathan said, rising politely. "Thank you for the coffee. Mr. Weatherby, this is Miss McKenna, who is helping Elena manage the household." Weatherby's pale blue eyes studied Sarah Beth with uncomfortable intensity. He was a thin man with thinning hair and the soft look of someone who had never done physical labor. His gaze lingered on her face and figure in a way that made her skin crawl. "Charming," he said, though his tone suggested anything but charm. "You have excellent taste in household staff, Cross. Though I must say, hiring such a young and attractive woman might raise eyebrows in town." Sarah Beth felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implication in his words. Nathan's jaw tightened visibly, and his voice carried a warning edge when he replied, "Miss McKenna is a respected employee of this ranch, Weatherby. I suggest you treat her as such." Weatherby raised his hands in mock surrender. Of course, no offense intended," but his smirk suggested otherwise. Sarah Beth set down the tray and retreated quickly to the kitchen, her heart pounding with anger and embarrassment. She had been at the ranch less than 24 hours, and already someone was questioning her character and Nathan's motives for hiring her. Elena took one look at her face and frowned. "What did that man say to you?" "Nothing specific," Sarah Beth replied, not wanting to repeat Weatherby's insinuation. "But I don't think he approves of my being here." Elena's expression darkened. "Mr. Weatherby does not approve of anything that does not put money in his pocket. Do not let his words trouble you, Misha. You know why you are here, and so does Senor Nathan. That is all that matters." The conversation in the main room continued for nearly an hour, the voices occasionally rising enough for Sarah Beth to catch fragments. She heard words like mortgage, extension, and collateral, none of which sounded encouraging. When Weatherby finally left, his departure was marked by the sharp sound of hoofbeats and Nathan's heavy sigh. Nathan appeared in the kitchen doorway a few minutes later, his face drawn with worry. He had loosened his tie and run his hands through his hair, giving him a disheveled appearance that was quite different from his usual composed demeanor. "I apologize for Weatherby's behavior," he said directly to Sarah Beth. "He had no right to speak to you that way." "It's not your fault," Sarah Beth replied, though she appreciated his concern. "Is everything all right with your business?" Nathan's smile was rueful. "Nothing that can't be handled. Weatherby just likes to remind me that the bank holds the mortgage on this ranch. He seems to think that gives him the right to interfere in how I run my personal affairs." Elena's expression suggested she had opinions about the banker, but she kept them to herself. Instead, she busied herself preparing Nathan's coffee exactly as he liked it, adding just a touch of cream and no sugar. "Will you be joining us for the midday meal?" Elena asked. I'm afraid not. I need to ride over to Miguel's cabin and check on Maria. She's been feeling poorly lately, and I want to make sure she doesn't need the doctor. Nathan accepted the coffee gratefully, taking a long sip before continuing. I'll probably be gone most of the afternoon. After Nathan left, Eleanor and Sarah Beth continued with their household duties. They cleaned the main room thoroughly, dusting the furniture and sweeping the floors. Sarah Beth marveled at the quality of the furnishings and the obvious care that went into maintaining them. Everything in the house spoke of prosperity and good taste, from the leather-bound books to the oil paintings on the walls. As they worked, Elena shared more stories about the ranch and its history. She told Sarah Beth about the harsh winter 2 years ago when they had lost nearly a quarter of their cattle to a late blizzard, and how Nathan had worked tirelessly to save as many animals as possible. She spoke of the summer when a grass fire had threatened to destroy everything, and how all the neighboring ranchers had come together to fight the flames. "Senor Nathan has many friends in this valley," Elena said as they polished the dining room table. "But he also has enemies. Men like Weatherby, who see only profit where Nathan sees responsibility. And there are others who resent his success." "What kind of others?" Sarah Beth asked, remembering Samuel Hartley's threats from the previous day. Elena's expression grew troubled. "Men like Samuel Hartley, who believe that power gives them the right to take whatever they want. He has been trying to buy up all the smaller ranches in the area, and he does not like it when people refuse to sell to him." The mention of Hartley's name sent a chill down Sarah Beth's spine. She had hoped that leaving with Nathan would be the end of her dealings with the wealthy rancher, but it seemed that might not be the case. "Has Mr. Hartley caused problems for Nathan before?" "Not directly," Elena replied carefully, "but there have been incidents. Cattle going missing near the boundary between their properties, strange accidents that seemed too convenient to be coincidence. Nothing that could be proven, but enough to make one wonder." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a horse approaching at a gallop. Through the window, Sarah Beth could see a young Mexican woman riding toward the house, her dark hair streaming behind her as she urged her mount forward. Even from a distance, it was clear that something was wrong. Eleanor rushed to the front door, Sarah Beth close behind her. The rider pulled up at the porch steps, her horse lathered with sweat and breathing hard from the rapid pace. "Elena!" the young woman called out in heavily accented English. "Please, you must help me. It is Maria. The baby is coming, but something is wrong." Elena's face went pale. "Carmen, slow down. Tell me exactly what is happening." Carmen, who Sarah Beth realized must be Miguel's sister-in-law, took a shaky breath before continuing. "Maria woke this morning with terrible pains. Miguel rode for the doctor in Cedar Falls, but that was hours ago and he has not returned. The pains are getting worse, and Maria is so frightened." Sarah Beth felt her stomach clench with sympathy and fear. She had helped her mother deliver her younger siblings, but she also knew how dangerous childbirth could be, especially when complications arose. Elena was already moving toward the kitchen. "Sarah Beth, help me gather supplies. We will need clean cloth, hot water, and anything else I can think of. Carmen, how far along is Maria?" 8 months, maybe a little more," Carmen replied, sliding down from her horse. The baby was not supposed to come for several weeks yet. As Elena rapidly assembled a collection of medical supplies, Sarah Beth helped pack additional items that might be needed. More clean linens, soap, a bottle of whiskey for pain relief, and some of Elena's herbal remedies. Her hands shook slightly as she worked, remembering her own mother's difficult labor with little Emma and how close they had come to losing both mother and child. "Can you ride?" Eleanor asked Sarah Beth as they finished packing. "Yes, but not very well," Sarah Beth admitted. She had ridden the family's old plow horse occasionally, but never anything spirited or at speed. "It does not matter. We will take the wagon. It will be slower but safer, and we can bring more supplies." Elena was already heading for the door, her movements quick and efficient. They hitched up the wagon in record time, with Carmen helping despite her obvious distress. As they drove toward Miguel's cabin, Elena explained what they might encounter and what Sarah Beth could do to help. Her calm competence was reassuring, but Sarah Beth could see the worry in the older woman's eyes. Miguel's cabin was a small but well-built structure nestled in a grove of pine trees near the horse corrals. Smoke rose from the chimney, and several horses were tied to the rail outside, indicating that others had already arrived to help. As they pulled up to the cabin, the sound of a woman's cries of pain drifted through the thin walls. Inside, they found Maria lying on the bed, her face pale and streaked with sweat. She was barely 20 years old, with the delicate features of youth, but pregnancy and labor had aged her beyond her years. Two other Mexican women, introduced as neighbors from a nearby ranch, were trying to comfort her, but their expressions suggested they were out of their depth. Elena immediately took charge, examining Maria and asking questions in rapid Spanish. Sarah Beth couldn't understand the words, but the tone was reassuring and professional. Elena had clearly dealt with difficult births before. "The baby is breech," Elena explained quietly to Sarah Beth. "This makes things much more complicated. We will need to try to turn the child," or she didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah Beth understood the implications. For the next several hours, Sarah Beth worked alongside Elena and the other women, doing whatever was needed to help Maria through her ordeal. They boiled water, prepared clean cloths, and took turns holding Maria's hands and offering what comfort they could. Sarah Beth found herself drawing on reserves of strength and calm she didn't know she possessed. As the afternoon wore on, Maria's condition seemed to worsen rather than improve. Her contractions were strong but ineffective, and she was growing weaker with each passing hour. Elena's attempts to reposition the baby had been unsuccessful, and the older woman's face showed increasing concern. Just as Sarah Beth was beginning to fear the worst, they heard the sound of multiple horses approaching at speed. Through the window, she could see Nathan riding hard toward the cabin, followed by a man in a black suit who must be the doctor, and Miguel bringing up the rear on a lathered horse. The doctor, a middle-aged man named Dr. Harrison, took over immediately upon his arrival. He examined Maria quickly and confirmed Elena's diagnosis, then began preparing for what he grimly called a difficult procedure. Nathan stepped outside with Miguel, offering what comfort he could to the frightened young husband. Sarah Beth found herself assisting Dr. Harrison as he worked to save both mother and child. The experience was harrowing, requiring every ounce of courage and composure she could muster. Blood, pain, and the constant fear of loss filled the small cabin, testing everyone present to their limits. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the sound of a baby's cry pierced the air. Doctor Harrison held up a small, perfectly formed girl, her tiny fists waving indignantly at being forced into the world before her time. Maria collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but alive, tears of relief streaming down her face. "She's small but healthy," Dr. Harrison announced, handing the baby to Elena to clean and wrap. "Both mother and child should recover fully with proper care and rest." As the crisis passed and the cabin filled with the sounds of celebration and relief, Sarah Beth stepped outside to get some fresh air. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. She had been at the Circle C Ranch for less than 2 days, but already she felt like she had lived through months of experiences. Nathan appeared beside her, his face showing the strain of the afternoon's events. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Elena told me how much you helped. Maria and Miguel are both grateful." "I just did what anyone would do," Sarah Beth replied, though she felt a warm glow of pride at his words. "No," Nathan said, his dark eyes serious. "Not everyone would have stayed to help. Not everyone would have had the courage to assist with something so difficult and dangerous. You showed real character today." As they stood watching the sunset, Sarah Beth reflected on the events of her first full day at the ranch. She had faced challenges she never could have imagined, discovered strengths she didn't know she possessed, and earned the respect of people she was beginning to care about. But she also sensed that this was just the beginning. The threats from Samuel Hartley still loomed. The financial pressures on the ranch were mounting, and the mysteries surrounding Nathan's past remained unsolved. The Circle C Ranch might be a sanctuary, but it was not immune to the dangers and conflicts of the wider world. As they prepared to return to the main house, Nathan helped Sarah Beth into the wagon with a gentleness that made her heart skip unexpectedly. His hands were strong and warm, and for a moment their eyes met and held. Something passed between them in that instant, a recognition of shared experience and mutual respect that felt like the beginning of something deeper. But before either could speak, Elena appeared with their medical supplies, chattering about the successful delivery and the need to check on Maria regularly over the next few weeks. The moment was broken, but not forgotten, as they made their way home through the gathering darkness. The Circle C Ranch settled into evening quietude, the successful birth having brought the small community closer together. Sarah Beth fell asleep that night, feeling more at home than she had in months, surrounded by people who valued her contributions and respected her capabilities. She had no way of knowing that Samuel Hartley was at that very moment planning his next move, or that Nathan's past was about to catch up with him in ways that would threaten everything they had all worked to build. The peace of the evening was a temporary reprieve in a storm that was far from over. But for now, Sarah Beth McKenna was exactly where she belonged, safe, valued, and beginning to discover the woman she was meant to become. The future remained uncertain, but it was hers to shape, and that knowledge filled her with a sense of possibility she had never experienced before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and new tests of the bonds that were forming among the people of the Circle C Ranch. The story was far from over, and the most difficult chapters were yet to be written.